crazy, paranoid science denial! But to his credit, it is creative, witty, and funny.
You speak of science like it's a singular article of faith. But, to your credit, you're polite?
It is indeed fashionable to write off science acceptance as a faith-based position. This used to be relegated to creationists, who would, with seemingly no sense of self-awareness, criticize science as being just as faith-based as their own wacky beliefs. Unfortunately and inconveniently, if you dig up a slight bit beyond the surface level, you'll realize that science is more than just a buzzword.
I take it back. What I mistook for politeness was more likely just arrogance.
Why not both?
I mean, you came straight in with "this is crazy paranoid science denial." You've been pedigree arrogant from square one. I only called you polite because I was being polite. One tries to lead by example, even if it's unlikely to take off.
I know. Why not both? Was a joke. An objectively funny one, too. This is also a joke.
The best jokes are the ones you need to explain twice, am I right? You clearly treat science not as a fluid, evolving set of methodologies by which probabilities can be assessed, but as some kind of singular entity that a person either accepts or denies in totality. That means you could be a Nobel Prize winning astrophysicist, but if you don't endorse homeopathic medicine, you're a science denier. Not everything that can be called science is necessarily true. Otherwise, you might as well just call it the truth.
You could indeed be a Nobel Prize winning astrophysicist who also has batshit crazy opinions about medicine.
Can I clear up something real quick? Do you think not endorsing homeopathy is a batshit crazy opinion about medicine? If not, you seem to have missed the point by a full 180 there.
Apologies, I misread your sentence originally. Endorsing homeopathy is batshit crazy and is not scientific.
Check out the big brain on Brad! Homeopathy is scientific, though. It's not religious, is it? It's not even a janky bastardization of religion. It's a janky bastardization of science. It's an unfalsifiable joke and a transparent racket, but wait for it. Some people call it science. Hello, McFly?
Science is a method of objective discovery of facts about the universe. These facts are strengthened by repeated testing, challenging, and gradual consensus based on repeated confirmation of hypotheses.
Not just repeated, but repeatable. That is the difference between consensus and empiricism, which is the same as the difference between faith and science. One paper that shows everyone how to do it is worth more than infinite papers claiming they did it. Just like one Sweden can fuck up the best laid plans of 100 nations who all bet on the other horse.
You sure? I'm not sure what we disagree on here. Claims are pretty meaningless unless they're backed with data or sound reasoning.
Or just consensus. Is short-term memory loss a symptom of the coof yet?
As we well understand, people are very good at compartmentalizing, especially when ideological biases are involved. For example, if there's a completely sane and rational position to take on a topic, and I find out that it's largely accepted by my ideological opponents and largely rejected by my tribe, I may rationally turn my back on and possibly make mocking YouTubes denouncing said position.
Yes, tribalism is not exactly a staple of any scientific method I've ever heard of. And the worst kind of tribalism is the binary kind. The with us or against us mentality. Like lumping everyone into either science denier or science believer.
It's a fair criticism.
No, it isn't. It's just a label.
It's like labeling someone an SJW. It's a derogatory shorthand which conveys certain patterns which tend to hold true.
So you do understand the difference. As and when it suits your ideological worldview.
Someone I label a science denier tends to employ magical thinking when it suits them, only accepting scientific claims that don't threaten their ideological worldview.
Fish in a barrel. Bruh. A small barrel. Is that the term you use for yourself? Science believer. Sounds like an oxymoron to me, but it does rather suit you.
Oh, no, that's pretty silly. Like saying I believe in evolutionary theory, or I believe the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Instead, I say that I accept science, or I could say I was a science acceptor, but that just sounds awkward.
They all sound awkward, don't they? Science believer, science acceptor, science follower, science disciple. They all sound like shit that has no place next to the concept of empirical data. What I hope I'm just now managing to get you to realise is science denial sounds just as awkward as all of that shit. You see why science acceptor sounds awkward? Because, among other things, that means you accept eugenics. That too is a scientific pursuit, but, and please let this be the last time I explain this, science is not one gigantic package deal whose parts are atomically welded together. That means calling someone a science denier just because they are unconvinced by the popular consensus surrounding one narrow avenue of science, especially a young avenue, is exactly as awkward as that phenomenon you encountered just now, because it makes you sound like you believe in a liquid-bearded super Jew in the sky, whose name happens to be science. You are not helping at all.
Because screw the libs, right? They're the ones that something gender something after all.
I really was enjoying not talking about pointless partisan politics for a second there. If you're going to default back to that particular light entertainment show, I think I might just shoot off and stare at two flies on the ceiling. I accept the theory of gravity. I do not accept the theory of patriarchy or critical race. If you would like to make your case for whatever piece of propaganda you're calling science in this instance, please do. Until then, all you've done is preach a buzzword. You might as well have just yelled science as though it's an argument. Like the exaggerated example I illustrated in this video. You are a cartoon character walking off a cliff that was drawn just for you. Science is by no means like religion. But you, and I mean you specifically, are no different from an abysmally miseducated religious grunt. You make a mockery of everything the Enlightenment has achieved. But to your credit, at least you're discussing it. At least you're not trying to cancel everyone who denies your arbitrary dogma. In this day and age, that is very much a welcome surprise.
Well, I've been cancelled by my far left friends, so I've got nobody else to argue with. And yes, I'm doing the thing that so many pretend to support but then betray at every opportunity. See Dave Rubin. I'm actually engaging with people who hold ideas that differ from mine. It helps that you're not a drooling imbecile like so many who argue against mask use, etc. Note, I'm not claiming that's your position on masks.
Thanks. I'll file that paragraph under this dude's life story.
Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Yeah, thanks for the material. I mean, vent whatever you want, but yeah, now gives me science, please.
In the video, the scammer character represents COVID-19 guidance, accepted by the overwhelming majority of medical experts.
Why does any mortal creature think they have access to the findings and conclusions of the overwhelming majority of scientific experts? You could read every medical journal ever written and you would still not even scratch the surface of the majority. Howsoever it may whelm. If all you know is what you've read in a few blatantly biased, unaccountably duplicitous news articles, and you think you're the Professor Xavier of scientists, I can only call that breathtaking.
It's not hard to find simple polls, etc., which address basic questions such as should we wear masks in public or should we social distance?
It's not hard to find polls saying yes to those questions, nor is it hard to find polls saying no to the same questions. It's not even hard to find organisations that give you one definitive scientific answer 1 month and then the opposite scientific answer the next month regarding the exact same piece of semi-permeable textile. That's how you can tell that organisations like the WHO and the CDC are giving you nothing but consensus. And therein, you see the problem with consensus. It can change with the winds of public opinion, and it can change with gigantic amounts of dodgy Chinese money. I was led to believe that the scientific method is not supposed to hang from such things, let alone get swung willy-nilly around the room like a wet cat. I guess I need to learn how to science.
Depends on the question. But for many questions, i.e. should we wear masks, the answers tend to converge, given sources which actually practice the scientific method. I'm not talking about some random ideologically charged pseudoscience blog with no data.
For example, a poll. Yes, by the way, you cited polls as your scientific reasoning when we're ostensibly talking about novel biochemistry. Don't go reckoning you got away with that, you funny person, you.
I mentioned Project Steve in another comment. It's a perfect example of the false both sides line of argumentation. You can find hundreds of scientists who deny the theory of evolution. Let's call them differently scientific, if you prefer. You can find orders of magnitude more who accept the theory of evolution. True believers of the science, if you prefer. Even if we filter them down to scientists who happen to be named Steve.
Here's what I prefer. You don't agree with their conclusions, and neither do I. That seems pretty easy to say. And in the event that neither of us are scientifically literate enough to fully understand what agree means in an experimental context, it might be a point so insolubly moot as to be wasting everyone's time. But if we're enjoying it, it's fine.
It's important to know which case you're dealing with, rather than just waving your hands in the air and saying, well, I hear lots of stuff from either side, so I don't know.
You appear to be facetiously poo-pooing the phrase, I dunno. Even from my educationally low vantage point, I'm delighted to be able to shed some light for you. There is no premise in this language of ours, no construable sentence, that more perfectly and elegantly embodies the scientific principle than the transcendent statement, I don't know. Has no one taught you that yet? The word science does indeed derive from a term meaning knowledge, but it evolved as it was derived, as words are wont to do. The methods of science are based on inquiry, on ascertainment, on surrounding oneself in the densest pockets of uncertainty. If at any point a scientist says, I know, he or she ceases to be a scientist, for where there is knowledge, there can be no science left on which to embark. An engineer, for the purposes of communicating in shorthand with a team of engineers, can say, I know, and their ambiguity is incidental. But a scientist, despite their dialogue or their turn of phrase, in every observation and calculation they make, can only at the very best say, I predict. Please understand this. It sounds so simple, but such is the case with the very first page.
No doubt I'm preaching to the choir when I say that you should be very suspicious of any organization. This pandemic has been politicized. So it's even more important to ensure that you're getting your data from multiple independent sources. And to paraphrase Feynman, avoid fooling yourself, since you're the easiest person to fool.
You are yet to tell us where you're getting any of your data. You're just claiming It's the consensus of everyone who matters. That's totally scientific of you, friend. To be fair, I haven't given any data either, but to be fair, I'm not crowning myself as the arbiter of the consensus. The most I could postulate is I'm not the only one. Pardon me for perhaps sounding unscientific, but I simply don't know.
It would take a monumental conspiracy for all this information to have somehow been flipped by the time it reached my ear.
It's already been flipped over. From true to false and back again. Everything has. The governing organisations you're listening to cannot decide, individually or among themselves, what we should or should not be doing or when. But they're forcing us to do those constantly self-contradictory things anyway. Because they can! Because you let them! Because they've bamboozled you into calling it science whenever they make any decision whatsoever. I'd suggest you write these things down when they happen so you don't forget, but the advice would be moot until you at least start paying attention in the first place.
I'm going to need some specifics before I wholesale agree or disagree with this.
Wowzers, and before you've presented a lick of specifics for anything on your end, who could have seen this coming?
But it just reinforces the fact that we shouldn't blindly trust our governments.
Then at least don't call them science. They're not.
Imagine how utterly screwed the USA would be if they blindly trusted the Trump administration, for example. Oh, sorry, I used a specific political example. I forgot that was off limits.
That sentence would serve its every purpose without the inclusion of the dreaded T word. Again, I'm no expert on the scientific method, but I'm reasonably sure it has bang-on naff all to do with the human effigy you all are burning this season. So bringing it up is usually a sign that you're not exactly staying on point.
Instead, we should weigh the overwhelming scientific consensus from multiple independent sources. Sounds reasonable, eh?
I think independent might be the element you've neglected to establish. No, wait, it's all of them. You've established nothing.
Unless, of course, I only engage with information sources which confirm my biases, which hopefully the mere existence of our discussion should disprove.
I don't know, do you still think I'm crazy and paranoid?
You're putting me in the uncomfortable position of needing to confess to a crime of hyperbole. I also enjoy using terms like slobbering messes, but I will tell you now in confidence, I don't actually believe that these people have issues with their salivary glands.
Science denial was what stuck in my craw, and you still appear to be standing by it. Or will that also be just a joke by the end of our next exchange? I'll take it. I would rather have spent 2020 in Stockholm than in Melbourne. Do you still think that makes me a categorical denier of gravity, thermodynamics, evolution by natural selection, etc.? Do you actually listen to people, or do you just talk?
So I made Korean street toast for the first time the other day, and it was pretty amazing. I didn't have a tool to julienne the vegetables, but a zester and some elbow grease worked just fine.
I've got to say, that's some pretty crazy, paranoid Japanese street toast denial. But to your credit, you are, I'll go with adorable. In any case, even if you did have access to the majority of scientific findings, there's still the niggling little problem that scientific methods do not work by consensus. They work by empirically assessing the predictability of the character of physical law. By the way, having Feynman as your avatar doesn't bolster your assertions either.
Theories are strengthened by consensus of results achieved via application of the scientific method.
Yes, not by hack journalists telling you, here's what all the scientists think.
Good, we agree. And certainly not by hack television commentators hosting true believers talking about grand sensational conspiracies.
It's like a virus so dangerous that we suddenly all need to adopt the North Korean model of governance. Otherwise, we'll, 99.9% survival rate? It's down to earth, is what it is. It's just science. You realise no one is qualified to tell you that, right? Not even scientists. So definitely not the soulless fear porn merchants your granny watches on TV. Maybe you're broadening your horizons by baiting a randomer on the internet.
Okay, apologies if my reading comprehension failed again, but if you're referring to yourself as a randomer, shame on you.
What's my name?
Yeah, I've been a big fan of yours and sub to you for many years. I'm giddy that you're even giving this randomer the time of day.
My name is Randomer. It's right there in my name. See it? Thanks for the praise, but I'm serious when I say you need to pay more attention.
I take it as a personal challenge to combat tribalism by conflicting with people I typically agree with. Consider it an anti-tribalist kata.
Try conflicting with the consensus. My dude, it is, as you've demonstrated, the thing you typically agree with. The boomers are getting hoodwinked by the only voices they trust. That's what I happen to be pissed off about right now. So far, you've given me no reason not to be.
Again, we totally agree, and it's what I'm pissed off about as well.
I could have sworn I was denying something that you're not denying. You called it science, and I think I've come quite close to establishing that this is blatantly not the thing I'm denying, but you don't appear to have conceded that yet. You've got Feynman's face right there to remind you of the simplest principle he taught us. Naming things is nothing. Scientifically speaking, it is nothing. Saying that is called a starling is a statement of consensus regarding the label we agree to give something. It has precisely nothing to do with understanding what a starling is, what its parts are, how they all work together, and how we are able to predict these things. That process is how I define science. Though I'm not interested in comparing definitions, what's important is simply doing it and never getting it confused with the somewhat less fine but still necessary art of calling things things.
Bear with me as I attempt to continue this discussion through this Feynman boner which has emerged.
Feynman is indeed Bay. I'm glad we can agree on the obvious.
And even beyond that, given two unqualified people trying to determine the truth in a field with which they're both wholly unqualified, it is more rational to trust the overwhelming majority of qualified authorities than to formulate our own pet theories on the back of a napkin based on some nut job that Tucker has had on a guest on his show who was really passionate and had these amazing and controversial ideas about how everything we understand about viruses is wrong.
Cool beans. The theories you like are science. The theories you don't like are just napkins. I'm learning a lot. Will this be on the test?
Now's your growth opportunity to work on your reading comprehension. The theories overwhelmingly trusted by qualified experts are the ones I place more trust in, given a position of ignorance. This is the only rational course of action, even if it turns out every so often that we've been hoodwinked and Pizzagate is real.
You have established nothing. You have done nothing but assert something you find overwhelming and qualified and expert. Thanks for not being a complete dick about it, but you've still given us nothing but buzzwords on which to mount any given popular myth. No amount of reading comprehension can possibly bring these extraordinary statements of yours from the screen into reality. For that, you're going to need this abstract scientific manner we call evidence, and indeed the extraordinary kind. So far, you have what we call no evidence. I'm trying hard not to bring the dreaded T word into it for the sake of the irony, but observe how I refrain for the most part.
It's a spectrum of crazy, no doubt. On one end you have people who accept overwhelming consensus of scientific authorities, and on the other you have people who reject the consensus in favor of that really passionate quack doctor that their uncle shared a video of on Facebook.
Cool peanuts! The theories you like are science, the theories you don't like have now evolved from napkins to Facebook. Notice, while your mind is rapidly technologically evolving the straw burger you draw to represent the bad tribe you don't like, Your mind itself has still not evolved from its embryonic black and white state. That doesn't sound like science, but hey, you call it science. Clever girl.
That guy might be right every once in a while, but you'd be less rational to trust him.
Fascinating. So I thought science was about getting data from experiments, wholly regardless of the guy who's doing it or the trust involved. I'll be totally honest with you, I actually thought judging ideas by the guy saying them was a well-documented kind of logical fallacy. Imagine the look on my face when it turns out it's a core scientific principle. I'm so glad I met you. Without you, I might have gone on to embarrass myself.
You are very clearly informed, but you're dropping the ball here. I think you're alluding to an ad hominem fallacy, but I'll be charitable and assume you mean to allude to an appeal to unqualified authority fallacy, which is less wrong. Deferring to a qualified authority is perfectly reasonable course of action, provided you continue to accept any claims by said authority as provisional. This is spelled out here.
www.logicallyfallacious.com/logicallyfallacious. There's something incalculably ironic about you appealing to the authority of a website to try and justify appealing to an authority. And I think we're starting to hone in on the name of the problem, aren't we? The dreaded A word. I suppose for the Greeks, it's the E word, ethos. And yes, in a court of law, it's logical practice to bring a forensic expert in for testimony. And it would be a sustainable objection to bring into question the legitimate qualifications of the expert. But you are not picking any of this stuff up from a court of law, where such mistakes are not made because they are constrained by accountability. Multiple independent sources could refer to a network of agents all mutually unaccountable. Even a journal like New Scientist is hardly invulnerable to political bias. Point is, if 7 dudes think the answer is black and 3 dudes think the answer is white, what you need to do is measure it. Nothing else is even remotely scientific. If 10 dudes think it's black and 0 dudes think it's white, you still bloody measure it. If it's a thing that you can measure. If you're doing things at all scientifically, that is. I speak often of the eternal battle between authority and liberty. But let's make this clear. Science is neither. Anything that appeals to authority or liberty is completely missing the point of science. All you've done here is appeal to authority. That is not science, but nor is it science denial. It's just our old friend authoritarianism. I ain't calling you a name, friend, but the A word is what you're doing.
Given ignorance of a topic, it is more rational to trust the opinion of a qualified authority than that of an unqualified one. I will trust the claims of an evolutionary biologist about the theory of evolution more than I'll trust those of a theologian about the same topic. It doesn't mean the evolutionary biologist can't be wrong. It means it's more rational to trust them, obviously.
I will trust scientists who credibly present themselves to me as scientists. I will not trust media shitsmiths who present whatever scientists they cherry-pick for the sake of their narrative. And you can always find the cherry you're looking for, by hook or by crook. Because the media is not interested in keeping you scientifically informed. They are interested in keeping you terrified by jargon that you can only get from them, so as to keep you locked in their tractor beam delusion that there is any laudable point in their clambering dinosaur existence. You have still done goose eggs squared to show that the consensus you've collected is presented without the influence of whoever is passing this information. I don't care if every network TV channel and every major newspaper is in consensus with each other. As a matter of fact, that would only make me more suspicious. Yes, this does indeed make it very difficult for a layman to actually confirm anything scientifically. And it fucking should be. It's I don't know. Remember? You, much like the naive and gullible elderly relatives we're worried about, have become convinced of something that no one has any business being convinced about, because it only just mutated into existence a year ago. The largest red flag anyone could possibly show is certainty. There's nothing less scientific than certainty. The media is showing it, our clown governments are showing it, and you are showing it. Do you know what does operate by consensus? What kind of truth does indeed mean nothing more than lots of people agree with this, therefore X? I'll give you a minute.
I'm glad you brought this up, as this is a great opportunity to point out the difference between fallacious dogmatic belief in religion, to which you are alluding, and scientific consensus. The difference between the two is that religious believers are wholly unqualified to weigh in on the truth of the existence of a supernatural deity, whereas scientists are very qualified to weigh in on truths about the natural world, at least within the area they study.
But bloggers are not. Utterly unqualified chances bloviating in YouTube comment sections are not. But here you are.
Agreed. Neither are professional accordion players, but who's talking about them?
You are. For all I know, you've still cited nobody. And again, you're the one carrying the extraordinary claims.
Certainly not. But if you're lucky, said bloviator or accordion performer might convince you to do the research required to observe a consensus of qualified authorities, not biased by your own political leanings or personal ideology.
Or I might convince you. This is a dance now. It's a Three Stooges routine, nothing more. But it's still fun. Telling me what you believe, without ever even dancing near your reasoning as to why you believe it. Except, of course, everyone else was doing it.
We've already tread this ground. I accept what the research converges on. I provisionally trust the overwhelming consensus of scientific authority.
Whatever that is. You've still pointed to nothing. You've fostered no understanding of anything. You've just called things things. Something has convinced you that shutting down civilization is a good idea. All you've managed to convey about it is that it's some kind of collective authority. They all apparently think the same, and it overwhelms you. And you call it science. You might not get it past peer review, is all I'm saying.
You're going to have to bring up a specific claim that we disagree on before I can dig any deeper.
No shutting civilization down, please. Especially not for the kind of mild respiratory disease, the likes of which appears every couple of years. Because then we'd be shutting civilization down every couple of fucking years. I don't have any data on hand to back up the following conclusion, but I'm going to go ahead and call that retarded. Meanwhile, you call it science. And you seem to call it undeniable. I haven't changed my mind. Have you?
I leave reading comprehension as homework, since this is obviously nothing like what I said, despite you seeming to desperately want to reinforce your people who go along with the COVID guidelines are just sheep narrative.
Consensus. Old fruit. It's a funny wee concept. You might want to look that up as homework and comprehend it. Not only is it a thing you said, it's the thing for which you've been blindly and tragically flying a flag this whole time. A white one. Now you just need a blue one and you'll have the full set. Parents out there, take heed, for now you have your answer. Some people, nay, many people, absolutely will jump off a bridge if their friends do. Goodbye and fuck right.